Good evening and welcome. My name is John Horning and I'm the Executive Director of WildEarth Guardians. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar. We've got Guardian supporters from all over the country taking part in this call. I like to call out some longtime Guardian supporters, but before I do that, we've got people from all over the Rocky Mountain West, including, of course, New Mexico, Arizona, Colorado, and we even have people from Florida, Maine, and Pennsylvania. So welcome to Guardians members and supporters from all across the West and all across the country. I love the in-person connections that we're now afforded to have. And what we learned in the pandemic is that while the virtual doesn't replace the in-person, it allows for ease of connection and allows us to bring Guardians together from all over the country. So I'm grateful for that. In these WildEarth webinars, we try to bring issue experts, national issue experts from across the country, people from frontline communities, oftentimes elected officials, and WildEarth Guardians staff to talk about critical issues at a critical time. Our purpose, as always, is to get people like you to feel inspired, to learn, and hopefully to take action to address the tremendous challenges of our time by demanding greater leadership from our elected officials to solve the nature and climate crises and create the kind of world that we want. And it's your spirited and passionate engagement that drives that change. Because of that, we always like to take questions. I'll do that towards the middle and definitely devote the last 5 to 10 minutes of our webinar for your questions. So please use the chat box to ask questions early and often, and we will get to as many as we can. I love it when I can't get to all the questions because it reflects a lot of audience interest. So please ask your questions. Today, we'll be talking about the campaign to preserve one of America's iconic rivers, the Rio Grande, or the Rio Grande. With me today to discuss these matters are Gabe Vasquez, a longtime resident of southern New Mexico. Gabe is the founder of the Nuestra Tierra Conservation Project, and he currently serves as a city councilor in Las Cruces, New Mexico. Gabe's devoted his entire career to advocacy and conservation for the border region of New Mexico. He's worked for New Mexico Wildlife Federation, Senator Heinrich, and recently played a critical role in drafting New Mexico's Outdoor Equity Fund. Also here is our very own Jen Pels, who is WildEarth Guardian's Wild Rivers Program Director. Jen and our Wild Rivers team are working to ensure that the West's most iconic rivers, including the Colorado and of course the Rio Grande, have sufficient flow to be a living river. Welcome to both of you.
Thanks, John.
Thank you, John. Good to be here with you.
Great. So I thought as a way of introducing yourselves, you could tell the audience a little bit about your connection to rivers. And why don't you go first, Gabe, and then Jen?
Yeah, thank you for that, John. Well, I'll start by saying that my family originally is from a little town called El Remolino in the Mexican state of Zacatecas. And my grandfather made his way at the time with 10 kids to Ciudad Juarez. He was used to living a very rural lifestyle, right, by working a ranch. And we came to a very industrialized place in Ciudad Juarez, which is one of the top places for what they call nearshoring, where the maquiladora industry has just exploded ever since the passing of the North American Free Trade Agreement. And so we moved from a very rural to a very urban environment. But the connection that my grandfather had to the wild and to nature and to the outdoors was not lost when he came to. So at every opportunity that he got, while he was a TV repairman and a mailman, he would take his grandkids, myself when I was a young kid, out to the Sierra Madre in Chihuahua, really where I experienced my first wild river, and I couldn't tell you which one it was because I was so little. But following that, my dad saw how passionate I was for being outside. The closest place he could take us to that resembled a wild river was in southern New Mexico, and that was the Rio Bravo, or the Rio Grande, as it's also called. And so there's a place right underneath, right below Caballo Lake State Park. There's a camp there called Percha Flats, and that was my first experience with the Rio Grande, and really my connection to the river. And that was fishing for catfish with hot dogs and a Superman fishing rod that we had just picked up at Walmart that very same day. And my love for the river really started at that young age, digging my toes into the sand, waiting for the catfish to bite. And then, of course, learning from my father that we couldn't eat the little ones. We had to let them go so that they could propagate and make new catfish. And that was my first entry into conservation and into the river.
That's beautiful. I love that, both honoring of history and hot dogs, catfish, and toes in the sand. So thank you for bringing us right into your life and your personal connection to the Rio. How about you, Jen?
That's a hard one to follow, Gabe. Yeah, so I grew up in Albuquerque, and when I was a young girl, and my father was a fly fisherman, and that was how he grew up on a farm, and that's how they escaped, was to go fishing. And so when it would get hot in Albuquerque in August, my dad and mom and I and my brother would pack in our Oldsmobile and drive up to the Conejos River, which is a tributary of the Rio Grande in southern Colorado. And we'd meet my grandparents who are from Kansas, and sometimes my uncle, and we would rent a tiny little mouse-infested cabin in the Conejos River, and we would stay. And as long as my dad would love to stay forever, but my mom didn't really like the mice very much. So we only usually stayed one. If we got 2 weeks, it was great. And so we would go, and for me, it was like freedom, because it was the only time when my parents really just let us totally off leash. And so we would, go, and there was this rickety old bridge that my brother and I would go and hang our heads over the edge and watch the river flow by, and, make ourselves sick. And it was just really like pure solace and freedom for me. And so it was a great way. And we would have games and we would fish. And I remember one time I was fishing and my brother was downstream, and it was like the first fish I caught the whole week we were there. And I was so excited, and I dropped it and it slithered away, and I was crying, and oh my gosh, the fish is gone. And then like 5-10 minutes later, here comes my brother walking up with this fish in his hand, like, did you lose something? And evidently we had killed it. And so he just saw it flow by, and he grabbed it and brought it back to me. So my hero brother saved the day and brought me my fish. So similarly, just being outside with my family and having that time to really just be in nature was how I connected with the Conejos and then the Rio Grande as well.
Beautiful. Isn't that lovely how you each come from different places, different families, different traditions, but the tie that bonds is a deep connection to rivers and to the Rio Grande. And what a lovely way to start this webinar. So thank you both for giving it such a personal touch. The Rio Grande is iconic in so many ways, mythic as well. Like, think about all the movies that have helped contribute to the mythology of the Rio Grande. I thought it would also be good, given its length and given its mythic identity, to help people understand it, given also its diversity. So could you each describe the river's natural and human history as you see it? And I thought we'd start with you, Jen, given that you're further north, and then and you as well, Gabe, to give, again, the audience a sense of what is this river really like?
Absolutely. So the Rio Grande starts in the Southern Rockies, above Creede, Colorado, and flows down through the San Luis Valley, which is a huge, broad valley where there's lots of agricultural production now. It's interesting because the northern part of the San Luis Valley, I would say, is more like Colorado. But then once you get south of Alamosa, a lot of that area looks a lot more like New Mexico and has the kind of acequias that are characteristic of northern New Mexico. At the state line, the river turns into, it goes from kind of that cold water mountain stream you think of into, it goes flat a little bit, and then it goes into a deep gorge. So it starts out into kind of a smaller gorge at the state line, and it gets deeper. And if you've ever been to the Rio Grande Gorge Bridge in Taos, it's a very deep gorge. Not quite the Grand Canyon, but pretty close. It's pretty amazing. And so that cuts through south of Taos, and there's really great whitewater rafting that is kind of the heart of that, the Pilar area. And it flows south and turns into more of what you think of as a desert river, which would be kind of the brownish river, the rich color and smell. And that river also is what has nourished many, many Pueblo communities over the years, and also traditional communities. And it provides nourishment for a bosque, which is a cottonwood and willow forest, one of the largest cottonwood and willow forests in the world, I'm told. And that happens above Espanola, and then south of Espanola, there's Cochiti Dam, which is the first main stem dam on the river, which its construction in the mid-1970s really changed the character of the river below, which below Cochiti is known as the Middle Rio Grande. And the Middle Rio Grande is the section of the river that runs through Albuquerque all the way till you get to Elephant Butte Reservoir. And that section is known for the bosque. It flows through Albuquerque, New Mexico, and there are 3 endangered species: the Rio Grande silvery minnow, the southwestern willow flycatcher, and the yellow-billed cuckoo, which are all species that Guardians has worked on since the mid-1990s and are still involved with today in terms of protecting the species to protect a living river. And I'll let Gabe pick up from Elephant Butte to talk about the southern section of the river.
Yeah, Gabe, as you describe it, don't feel obligated to take us all the way to the Gulf, but take us as far as you're comfortable.
Thank you, John, and thank you for that wonderful description, Jen. I think one of the most important things about the river, from its headwaters in Colorado, at least down to Texas, in southern New Mexico, is just the amazing history and cultures that it has sustained and peoples that it has sustained for thousands of years. Right down south for us, it's the Jornada Mogollon culture that slightly overlapped with the Mimbres Mogollon culture, primarily in the Gila area, as well as in eastern Arizona. And so these 2 key watersheds have sustained people in the desert for just thousands of years, and later on Pueblo communities as well. So for us, the river really is part of our identity as a community in southern New Mexico, with the Jornada Mogollon really being the earliest people that we could trace back to this place that sustained themselves from the water that occurred in the hot Chihuahuan desert landscape, followed by the Piro Manso and the Tigua people, at least in this part of southern New Mexico. The Piro Manso Tigua people, really from what you would consider to be the chili capital of the world in Hatch, New Mexico, all the way down to Ciudad Juarez, was really the places where these folks lived for hundreds of years. And their descendants still live here today. In fact, we have the Pueblo of Tortugas in Las Cruces, an unrecognized tribal group and tribal community that tells the stories about different stretches of the river. And in fact, they're called Tortugas Pueblo because they settled on a bank of the Rio Grande in the 1600s, 1700, place where they had migrated to, where the turtles, it was such a sandy outcropping on at the time, I think it was the box turtles, the desert box turtles would use it as a nesting ground. And so that's why they're called Tortugas Pueblo, and we have Tortugas Mountain. So much of our cultural identity is tied to the river. From Elephant Butte down, right? Elephant Butte, part of the Rio Grande project at the time, I believe was the world's largest dam when it was built in the 1920s. really just completely bottleneck the flow of the water for the purpose of serving irrigators at the time. And this was really part of the height of what we would call the Western expansion, and really under this theory of manifest destiny. So many of the folks in the Midwest in particular, but folks in the East as well, following the gold rush, were still moving west, and farming and agriculture opportunities that existed in places that were actually very lush at the time and looked very much differently. At that time, we had cottonwood forests down here too. Now we have the invasive salt cedar that lines almost the entire banks of the river from, Elephant Butte all the way down to El Paso, Texas. But it forever changed the character of the river. The photo you're seeing here is what the river typically looks like, the overpass of I-10 in Las Cruces. And you can see these tiny little puddles that actually sustain life over the course of the year. Usually our river is dry for 7 to 8 months. And so what we end up getting is tons of silt that gets carried over after the irrigation season, just completely, just demolishes as it's turned on and turned off, kind of the ecosystem that gets created temporarily when we do have 3 or 4 months of water on the ground, and leaves these puddles behind. And you'll find catfish in there, you'll find carp in there, of course the invasive bullfrog. You'll find all kinds of migratory birds during the winter coming down and staking out their own little spots here, right? And so even though our river is completely dry, it is incredibly sandy. In most parts, it is, a muddy mess. It still manages to sustain a little tiny bit of life. And so what we see in terms of like the whitewater type of Rio Grande in the Taos box, for example, in the winter, you would see a completely dry river. In fact, our backgrounds here that we're using today probably reflect what the Rio Grande looks like from that stretch of Elephant Butte and Truth or Consequences down to El Paso. And I'll just add, when it gets to El Paso, it doesn't get any better. The Rio Grande there is completely, I would call it, militarized. So the river became a line for the border many years ago, and has been almost completely channelized with concrete from Sunland Park all the way down to Fabens. And it's really used as a weapon to keep migrants out. They have cut these culverts so deep that it's almost impossible to cross. And so the river isn't thought of for irrigation purposes or for outdoor recreation. It's weaponized. It's a weaponized body of water from Sunland Park all the way down to Fabens. So a much different picture, I think, of the river as it then carries water really from Van Horn all the way down to Brownsville. Occasionally carries water with seas, and then empties out to the Gulf of Mexico.
Well, that gives us a good sense of the character and the history and the cultures and the ecology of the river. So thanks to you both for providing that introductory context. I'd like to structure our conversation in sort of basic 2 parts. Like, let's explore the problems and challenges, and then let's explore how we grapple with solutions. And I think in talking about the challenges and in listening to you, Gabe, I was reflecting about the author Paul Horgan, who referred to the river as America's great river. And obviously that greatness has been diminished in so many ways. You referenced Elephant Butte Dam, the Bureau of Reclamation's first dam in the West. And when we were talking about this the other day in preparation for the call, you shared aspects of Elephant Butte Dam through an environmental justice lens and talking about settler colonialism. And it actually was all new to me. I had only thought about Elephant Butte through the lens of its ecological impact. And I would love it if you could share that perspective and how disruptive the dam has been to the cultures and peoples and communities and the ecology of the river from Elephant Butte down.
Yeah, thanks, John. And I'll be brief here, but I think the bottom line is when when the Rio Grande project came to life and Elephant Butte was built, there was a lot of Mexican land grants that still existed in southern New Mexico, or at least remnants of Mexican land grant families that existed that own land, that were sustenance farmers. There were sustenance agricultural producers, but this opportunity to actually control water and to allocate water for economic development purposes drew in a large population of people from Midwestern states like, you know, Kentucky and Indiana and Illinois, folks looking for an opportunity in the West. And what ended up happening was that, you know, and there was signs, and Bureau of Reclamation put out advertisements for come settle the Mesilla Valley. And so a lot of families that had been farming here in the county for generations back ended up becoming farmers. And many of them couldn't produce titles for their farms, couldn't produce, if they had a title in Spanish, the state government deemed it invalid. And so they were not to have the rights to that land, and they would sell it off to families that had money. And so you ended up really changing the population and the cultural demographic of people in this valley. And so it really upset the system of power in a large way, and also just began to propagate what still exists today, which is really the value that we placed on surface water from the Rio Grande to be exclusively for irrigators and economic development. Right before, it was for all kinds of things. It was for wildlife. People still fished and hunted for sustenance. It was where you would wash your clothes. I mean, it's where kids would play in the river. But from that point on, it was really just for irrigators, development, selling land, and bringing opportunity to other folks. Dozens of Mexican workers died of disease while they were building the dam. And then later on, we had, all these displacements. So, in addition to the ecologic damage that it caused, that really altered the power structure of southern New Mexico, because as I said before, we were all tied to the land as this natural resource that brought us here in the first place, and why we settled here. So yes, that's a dynamic that still exists today. I'll say the three largest water users in the Mesilla Valley are white pecan farmers that have, that settled here somewhere. And so they now use the majority of a resource in a 64% majority Hispanic community that doesn't get to see water in their river for 7 to 8 months out of the year. And so I think there's a question there of environmental and social justice of how we treat our water and how it impacts the psyche of a community.
It's a powerful story, and I'm almost a little embarrassed being a river advocate that I did not know it. And when you think about both ecological and cultural displacement, it's a story that I think is compelling and needs to be told. And so thank you again for sharing it. I wonder, before we shift back to Jen, you were also, I've had friends in southern New Mexico who've always said, you think you've got it bad, for those of us in northern New Mexico or central New Mexico. We've sort of have this history of being conditioned to a dry river. And I wonder if you could just speak to that. It's a huge issue, but just the challenge.
Yes,
yeah.
Absolutely, John. I mean, part of my own personal frustration in seeing news coverage about the Rio Grande and the drying of the river it's really only got statewide attention when the stretch of in Albuquerque has started to go dry, right? People are freaking out. They're saying, what's going on? What's happening? Since 1908, even before the Rio Grande project, when the population boom in upstream, our river started going dry even back then, but certainly after Elephant Butte. And so here, depends on the time of the year, but usually you have hundreds of families standing at the bridges or at the junctions where the Rio Grande flows for 1 or 2 months. And it's a ceremony. I mean, kids go out there, they jump in this muddy water full of foam and sticks and mud and trash and all that. I mean, Nobody in their right mind would probably ever jump in a body of water like that, but it's a celebration that the river is back in our community. And we've been like kind of accustomed to that. It's not a tradition to go out and greet the water when it comes and flows back into our community. And so it's a little hurtful, right, when we think about where the power structure of New Mexico, Santa Fe, and in Albuquerque for so long, that it's been okay for our communities down here not to have water for 7 to 8 months out of the year, but it's until it impacts places that have more political power that people really start to take notice. And so I just think it's a shame, because for folks down here, we've been just thinking that it's almost natural not to have a living river in southern New Mexico, and that we somehow deserve not to have water in the river because it's been that way for so long.
Yeah. In reflecting on what you're saying, hurtful, yes, that the power structure deny a living river, and hopeful that so many people go out each year to see the return of that pulse of life. So again, thank you for sharing. Jen, why don't we go back upstream into the more northern reaches, southern Colorado, northern New Mexico, and why don't you describe what you view to be the sort of equity issues that have arisen around the management of the Rio Grande?
Yeah, well, I want to add two things. One is when I was listening to Gabe talk about, before the dam was even built, there being dry, the river being dry in southern New Mexico. I learned just in my research and my work that the Secretary of the Interior actually put a moratorium on water use in the upper Rio Grande Basin around that time, because farmers in the San Luis Valley and upstream in central New Mexico were using so much of the water that there was just no water left downstream, and all of the upstream practices were causing sedimentation. And so the Secretary of the Interior actually stepped in and said, I'm gonna, no more water development until we figure out some sort of equitable allocation of the river, which was the Rio Grande Compact, which was signed in 1938. I kind of find it ironic that that was the equitable allocation at the time, and it was built on a time frame that was historically wetter than any time frame that has existed since, and that compact is still in existence today. And due to climate change and the reduction of flows of climate change, there's a really important article that came out. The Bureau of Reclamation did their own study, as well as there were some articles that talked about the impacts of climate change and how they're being dispersed within the Rio Grande Basin. And the prediction is that there'll be 25% reductions in flows in Colorado, 35% reductions in flows in central New Mexico, and over 50% reduction in flows in southern New Mexico and Texas. And I think the thing that's really interesting about that is it's not because the reason why those climate impacts are being distributed the way they are is because of this agreement that was made in 1938 based on a really wet period that didn't anticipate the conditions that exist now on the ground. And so it's really clear to me that, it's great that a long time ago, some people thought that they could equitably allocate the waters of the Rio Grande between three states and two countries, without including people in the conversation that need to be a part of that conversation. Central New Mexico, southern New Mexico was not a part of that conversation. And now here we are, a century later, saying, well, we can't change the compact because that would be really hard, but let's not pretend that those impacts are going to be felt equally amongst the less powerful and the more powerful. So I think and I just want to make the point that while climate change is a huge amplifier, like these issues existed back before Elephant Butte was built. Too much water was being used even for this mighty, mighty river. And so we're just kind of at that reckoning moment where the climate isn't going to allow, the system is completely broken. It's not working for anyone now. And so how we put it back together can either be in the century of unequitable, it's the century of unfairness, or we can make it a more equitable and just system for all of us. And I think that's where I land, and that's what we're trying to work for going forward.
Just returning to the compact, I remember you showing me a graph a few years ago, And it struck me. I mean, it's just such an amazing presentation of data that showed how inequitable the compact is under drier times. And there's nothing fair or logical or just about it. It just reflects the imperfect idiosyncrasies of a document that was written, at this point, almost a century ago. And it makes no sense to allow that to continue to govern, even as there are obviously lots of interests that are bought into that. So, we've got Elephant Butte, dams, a compact, a water crisis, a climate crisis, systems that are over allocated, underappreciated. What do you see as the biggest challenges facing the Rio Grande? I mean, I've touched on some of them there. And how does it relate to the broader themes of what's going on throughout the American West that are very topically relevant given drought, fire, and all the themes that are out there in the media now? Why don't you touch on that, Jen, and then we'll go back to you, Gabe.
Yeah, there's a lot there. I mean, I think one of the things that is obvious to me as an environmental advocate, but I think also speaks to some of the social justice issues that are happening, is that when the waters of the Rio Grande were allocated, whether through the compact or whether through state water laws, the river wasn't taken into consideration. There was never a, okay, we have to leave 80, like of what we allocate, we have to leave 20% in the river. There was never a cap. It was just use to the maximum extent possible every drop of water in that river and its tributaries. And that's the law of the West. That is what water law says, is to use them for the maximum beneficial use of water for irrigation and municipal uses. And there's not, and any sort of in-stream flow laws that have come after are junior. So they fall in the system in a way where in a dry year like this year, they don't matter because you're never going to meet an in-stream flow, right? If there is one that even exists. In New Mexico, there are very few in-stream flow restrictions at all. Like there used to be as part of the biological opinion that managed species in the Middle Rio Grande, but that doesn't even exist. So like yesterday, I think the Albuquerque gauge was at 80 CFS, which is 20 CFS below what the minimum flow was supposed to be 10 years ago. And so, so when you don't have any sort of allocation for the river, then you're constantly using water on the back of the ecology, on the back of people who want to go to the river to recreate and to enjoy. And like Gabe said, like there are more than just the irrigators that should have access to water in New Mexico and Colorado and Texas and Mexico. So that's just one, but I'll stop there.
Yeah. How about you, Gabe?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that there's a river, such a fragile river that's been more battered, abused, and overdrawn than the Rio Grande that I at least experience or seen in this country. And so to treat it that way, as Jen mentioned, is going to spell disaster for our communities. We don't use surface water here for municipal use, but there's, if you look outside in the Mesilla Valley, and I can see outside my window and see new starts of pecan groves in the ground, 8 inches tall, 10 inches tall, 20 years or so before they actually start all the ridiculous amounts of acre feet of water that it takes to grow a swamp tree, right? Because that's really what they are. If we continue at this pace, not only is our river going to be thin, but our well water as well. The Mesilla Basin and the Jornada Basin, two of the major sources of water for drinking water for municipal use, but also for agricultural use. The less water we have in the river, the more that these wells are, the deeper these wells are going to get, and the more that we are going to eliminate any source of for people or for wildlife or for farming or for agriculture. And so to me, it should be just, we need to rethink of how we are, allowing water use to continue in a valley that is predicted through climate change and other water models to next 10 to 20 years. And so if we don't change the way, if we don't change different state policies that allow us to conserve water for, the next 100 years at the very minimum, the river is going to, the symptom of the river drying is that we're also going to dry up our under courses as well. And that's just really shameful.
Yeah.
And it's just the identity, right? It's like, if we don't have a river, this year we only had, I think, one month of water allocation. It's going to slowly erode who we are as a people and that settled along the river. Pretty soon we'll lose if we never have water again. And you'll just see, I mean, it's just devastating for the psyche of a community as well.
Yeah. Well, thank you both for scoping the challenges and identifying the problems. I'd like to shift now and start talking about what we need to do about this. And we've got a couple questions from audience members. So I thought I'd use a question to pivot. This one's from Elaine Chimino. What about the Cochiti Dam? The BOR, Bureau of Reclamation contract is about up. The structural integrity is questioned by the Pueblo, and they lost most of the agricultural land. Would you support the dam coming down? And what would that mean for flooding with increased storms and landfill pollutants? There's a lot in that question. Why don't you take it, Jen, and then we'll shift to some of the other questions we have.
Yeah, I think Cochiti is definitely, from an ecological standpoint, it has created huge challenges in the Middle Rio Grande Valley. A lot of those endangered species challenges, a lot of the problems with keeping the river wet in that particular reach are because the dam obviously traps sediment, and so it has caused a huge problem and changed the geology of how water moves, the hydrogeology of the area. Do we support it coming down? I mean, I think it's a really complicated issue because it's on Pueblo land. And so I think that, the Pueblos have a lot of autonomy over how they want to proceed. And I would defer to the Pueblo to be the ones who lead those decisions. It is really complicated because of the water quality, because of all of the landfill sediment and potentially radioactive things that are in the sediment above the dam. And so, I mean, it's a huge undertaking. It would have to be very well planned. There would have to be some serious reclamation of the sediment upstream before it could come down. And yeah, there would have to be probably some really big considerations around how the floodplain operates now. You can't rely on a bunch of levees that are just not particularly protective of those communities that have been built there. You'd have to really create a buffer if you were to take it down. So it would be a huge undertaking. I think that from an ecological standpoint, it would solve some of the problems that are kind of getting band-aided over on a regular basis. But it would be a huge undertaking, and there have been conversations that I've been in about it, and I think those will continue. And my understanding is that the lease ends it's a 100-year lease, and so we're at almost year 50, I think 1973. So it'd be in 2 years would be the 50 years that the reservoir has been standing.
Yeah, your response reminds me that it's easier, not easy to destroy rivers, and very, very complicated to help bring them back and restore them. So just speaks to the importance of protecting rivers when they are in good condition, because the job of restoring is quite a challenging one. Gabe, you've talked about introducing a memorial in the New Mexico State Legislature to help protect New Mexico's rivers. Could you tell us what that is calling for and why you think it's an important intervention point?
Yeah, thank you, John, and thanks for the learning opportunity too on Jen's part, from what it might take to like you said, to restore and essentially eliminate a dam from a river system. Gosh, that is so hard, it's so complicated, but I bet if we did it well, that we might inspire other people to do it in other places, at least to that scale, because those are big dams. Yes, so John, I think we have to look for solutions. There has to be hope. There has to be opportunity. In my community, I think there's been a real reckoning from folks that see the lack, even this tradition that we have of having water in our river for 3 to 4 months in the summer, where kids can play and families can fish and people can picnic, has been reduced over the last 3 to 4 years to just 1 month, right? Or a month and a half or 2 months. And so people are starting to take notice. And in particular, I'm hopeful for the young people who are really expressing their love for the river through art, through music, through different events that they hold in the community. There's murals all over town about restoring the Rio Grande. Even on the immigration side of things, the river has become this migratory, not just people who migrate, but migratory birds and butterflies, and just the understanding of how people and animals move alike, right? For habitat and food in our modern society, jobs, like the river is such a powerful symbol. And so that gets to the point of yes, restoring a living river for its ecologic benefits and for the human and cultural benefits. And so Representative Angelica Rubio, who represents District 35 here in the state of New Mexico in Las Cruces, and myself have been working on a memorial that would call for a study. We're going into a budget session, is what we call it. Really only budget related items would be considered, and other special bills that the governor decides to put on the call. However, a memorial doesn't require the governor's signature, and so legislators, each body of the House, can pass them without requiring that. But you can also direct to have studies done as part of introducing a memorial on a particular issue. And so what we are aiming to do in this next legislative session is to call for a study that would bring together our respective water management and natural resource agencies to see what changes to state law or administrative water policy would need to take place to maintain a minimum amount of water in the river from Colorado all the way down to Texas. As Jen mentioned, it's a complex web of both state and federal laws that really govern the way that we use the water for the river. At least with this particular bill, we can at least look at the mechanisms within state policy and state administrative that we know that we have to overcome in order to create a living river. And hopefully that gives us a better idea of what needs to change in order to collectively, right, restore this river that we all love. And so we're hoping that gets traction amongst legislators, and we'll certainly be pushing forward. And I know we can count on the support of WildEarth Guardians through as well. So thank you all.
You're welcome, and thank you for championing that and working with the state legislature on it. One of the things that I reflect on in dealing with the water establishment is that they want to push citizens away and say these issues are too complex and you have to have a PhD in engineering or a law degree. And what you spoke to both in this memorial and in the movement of people through murals and art and music, that's the movement that we need on behalf of the river to pressure political officials to think differently about how we can create living rivers. So thank you for your inspiring work. Jen, what about the Guardian's work? And I'm thinking about the call to action in the chat box to urge Congress to support and fund a National Academies of Science study for the Upper Rio Grande Basin. And I urge all of our audience to take action. What would you say about that, and maybe one other pillar of Guardian's work to help bring solutions to create and sustain a living Rio Grande?
Yeah, thanks, John. The National Academy of Sciences study has been something that we and our allies have been talking about for a long time, which is trying to get a third party, the National Academy of Sciences, to look at the reservoirs and the climate implications and really kind of come up with a foundational document that provides recommendations on how we can change the system that is clearly broken. And we think, there are ongoing, and there have been in the past studies that have been done at other levels, and those are great. And we hope that we can build on this, but we really do need like a roadmap. Climate change is making this a really urgent task. We can't wait 10 or 20 years to come up with a solution. And so this particular study, it's really close. It just needs to be funded. And then, we already have some language, and the National Academies is actually really excited to do this study. So we're hopeful that you all can take action, that we can get the congressionals to really champion this, and we can move past this. And what this study would do is be a foundational recommendation. And then you can just go down the list and say, okay, what do we need to do? We need to address the compact. How do we do that? And hopefully there'll be recommendations there. And so that deals with reservoir reoperations and trying to change the timing of water. I would say the other foundational solution that we really need to come to terms with, and I think that climate change and the reckoning that we're feeling right now is really the impetus for this, is that we need to use less water. Like we cannot allocate more water than exists. And that sounds so simple, but that's really what we need to do, is we need to use less water. And so because the system is over allocated, we need to figure out a way to transition to something else. And I think of it in the climate context, we need to transition away from fossil fuels into something new. And obviously that transition we want to be just. And so the same thing I would say in the water context is that we need to retire some water rights. We need to, leasing can be a transition, and then honestly we need to permanently retire water, and that water needs to, unfortunately or fortunately, whatever you want to say, come from agriculture, because that's where 85% of the water is being used in the Rio Grande Basin. And so we need to think of ways in which we can do that in a way that is just and redistributes those impacts, but also really does put us within the river's means, which we're far beyond today in terms of allocations.
Living within our means is always a challenge in a basin like the Rio Grande, and doing it in the context of the climate crisis is more urgent and more challenging. I wanted to touch on or pull out a theme that both of you seem to be grappling with, which is the challenge of agriculture. And agriculture everywhere in our country is important. Obviously, we need food. And yet the challenges of the power that agricultural interests wield in political forums, and in this case, over the water policy and the law and ultimately the Rio Grande's waters is quite significant. How do we overcome that power? You've been talking about it, but I wonder if you could reflect back more about how we overcome that, and what are the ways we can empower lovers of living rivers to protect the rivers that they love. Gabe, you wanna field that one?
Yeah, no, I mean, it's a really tough question, and I'm not sure that I have the answer to that, because we live in a state in New Mexico that has prided itself on its agricultural heritage since its founding as a state, and has really built its economy on agriculture from its very inception. And so that's not hard. I mean, that's not easy to, it's not easy to make a dent in the types of cultural practices that exist that may not be sustainable because they are so closely tied with our identity and our heritage. That's tough. That's a really tough conversation. Unlike many other states, New Mexico was never really industrialized in the sense that we didn't get big tech booms. We didn't get heavy industry. We kind of stayed an agricultural producing state for many years and built our economy on it. And we're now struggling after this massive era of fossil fuel extraction that has brought this revenue windfall to our state, to figure out what we're going to do next. Right? I think you and maybe others may have seen a certain British billionaire take off from Truth or Consequences, New Mexico, on flight to space. And to me, it was kind of funny because I personally am very skeptical about the economic impact and benefit that that may bring to our southern New Mexico communities, but the faith that people had in that project and continue to have in that project, and as well as our elected officials, is that we're trying something new, that we're trying that other states don't have a leg up on New Mexico on just yet, right? Maybe Alabama, maybe Florida, but there's this desire to diversify the economy in ways that are non-agricultural. Right, and of course we have a lot of military bases, research bases here that bring in a lot of dollars to communities and lots of jobs, but we need more. And so we need to present an economic alternative to New Mexico's future that doesn't just solely rely on our traditional agricultural production, which honestly is a tiny, it's like less than, I don't know, 4% of our total GDP in our state anyway, right? But it's part of that cultural ties to it that really that makes it really hard to change hearts and minds when it comes to the policy of how we use our water. And that's the tough part. So I don't think that we have an easy answer. I think Jen mentioned retiring water rights, and it may have to be a steady stream of policy changes and retiring water rights and little tweaks to here and there that will get us to where we need to get. But it's going to be hard to have one seismic change in water policy and that can deliver the results that honestly we probably need now. But it's so much of it is cultural, so much of it is anthropological, and how we see ourselves as community members and as members of the state. So it's going to be really hard, but it can be done. And I think especially for those agricultural producers, providing alternatives, right, to what they're doing now is also really important. Things like paying them for native landscape restoration, right, so that they're not forced to pass down a farm for the provide a living, but maybe they get an incentive from the state or the federal government for that not to be working land anymore. There's programs like that exist out there, but considerably, if we beef them up, we could start slowly making a dent in some of these places. And the last thing I'll say is we have to differentiate between the commodity crops and the sustainable and the sustainability crops. There's too many commodity crops in our state that where those dollars are really being very limited in how they actually impact. They're really building the wealth of these mega farmers that are exporting their products to China and Japan and other places at a premium, and we're not really using agriculture to feed our families or to feed our state. It's really a business, and so we need to get a hold of that as well.
Thank you for that, Gabe. I just appreciate talking about the agricultural problem, because without grappling about it, grappling with it, we're not going to have living rivers. And because, as you said, it's so sacrosanct and such an important part of the culture and the economies, though small in its bottom line, it's too few people are willing to grapple. So thank you for grappling. Jen, I know you touched on some of this, but what would you add to some of the particulars around retirements and leasing that touches on this theme of agriculture being both problem and solution to create living rivers, a living Rio Grande?
Yeah, it is complicated, and I think that one of the things I just wanted to mention was we do have examples through the Acequia communities of sharing and communities sharing water for the greatest good. And I think that we can learn a lot from those communities in terms of how we share water. And I do think that it needs to be a community-based community kind of sacrifice. I don't think it should be on any one community. So, from the San Luis Valley, the 600,000 acres that are irrigated there, to the Middle Valley, like everyone's going to have to give up something. It's not going to be, I think if everyone doesn't give up something, then it's going to be just people pointing fingers at each other saying, oh, it's the San Luis Valley, or oh, it's the Middle Valley. And I think that argument is kind of tired. And I think that if people really start to look hard at their communities and say, okay, where can we limit the amount of water, or what are the most, low revenue and high water using crops, and how can we, address those? Like alfalfa is one of those. it's grown everywhere, and it's grown in the San Luis Valley and shipped to southern New Mexico for the dairy industry. And at least it's staying in the region versus, as Gabe said, the ones that are going to China. So I think there is like a really important conversation that needs to happen both within individual communities and then across communities. And I think, leasing is a temporary option. My worry about leasing as the solution, which I know a lot of river basins in the West are talking about, leasing is the way to go, but there's not enough money. I mean, it's millions and millions of dollars to lease every single year, especially when it's so over allocated. And so I do think we need to think about not just maybe leasing as a transition to get somewhere else, but ultimately we need to figure out what is a sustainable level of agriculture in certain communities, and how can we make it so that some of those other values that are not agricultural values still are on a level playing field with those agricultural values. And I think that value shift is going to be, we need people to stand up and start talking about that value shift and demanding that value shift, because that's ultimately, I think, the impetus for these bigger changes around agriculture and sustainable use.
Yeah. Yeah, I appreciate you likewise grappling with these incredibly heavy, complex problems with a pragmatism that is necessary to put water back in rivers. These are not easy things to accomplish, and you've been at it for a while now and putting your shoulder to the wheel. So I appreciate all your work to bring water back to the Rio Grande. I want to get to one question from our audience and then close with a quick question for each of you. This one is from LL Wilkinson, and I really wanted to ask it because of both what you both touched on this, and here's the question. I've been here for 25 years, but how to address the invasive trees and plants as a person young to the geographical area, young in quotes, how do people restore the Rio? And then LL Wilkinson later asks, aside from congressional solutions, talk about on-the-ground boots. Restoration of the Rio Grande could take priority due to the time frame with climate crisis. And I wonder, as you think about responding to that question briefly, just like there's a system here. So how do we marry maybe the on-the-ground approach with the systemic nature of the problem? You want to each touch on that in maybe 30 seconds?
Sure, I'll take a quick crack. I think the problem is invasives come when river systems don't operate as they have historically. So when there are no floods, then invasives take over. And like Gabe said, invasives take over when there's no water in the river. So I think that if we can come to a place where we can have more natural hydrology, I think that will be one way to help. And then I think obviously there can be restoration that happens in terms of removing invasives and planting. And that is happening. That happens a lot near Bosque del Apache National Wildlife Refuge. And they've taken out tons of invasives and planted cottonwoods. And it's just a long process. And if you don't have the help of, water is a really powerful tool. And if you don't have the help of water, it makes it a lot more difficult to maintain. I'll let Gabe go now.
Yeah, beautiful. Thanks, Jen. Gabe, you want to touch on that quickly?
Yeah, I don't know that I have a better answer than Jen, other than to say that, yes, there's been work done here at New Mexico State University in restoring native river habitats and replanting cottonwoods and other native trees and removing salt cedars. It's so costly and almost damn near impossible. I mean, these are small scale demonstration projects to show what kind of ecosystem you can create and kind of mimic what the river might have looked like, 200 years ago. But it's tough work. There's creative solutions. One of the things we're doing in the city of Las Cruces is using reclamation water from our wastewater treatment facility to create permanent, like year-round wetland areas for birds and other habitat on these little stretches of the river Rio Grande, and actually using them and selling them to the public as opportunities for bird watching and small nature parks and nature activities and nature walks. And so I think the city of Sunland Park is just undergoing something similar, because they have water in a tiny little stretch of their river year round from an El Paso Electric water reclamation plant, or water discharge from El Paso Electric plant out there. And so they're making the best out of what they can to restore these native lands and places. And so it's tough. There's no easy solutions, but I mean, we can at least create small pockets with boots on the ground and getting creative.
Yeah, I love that. It's like we need to remember what the river once was and what it can still be. So those local projects really do play a critical role in getting people inspired about the need to restore a living river. And with that, I wanted to close, just we're at time, with a question to each of you briefly. What keeps you hopeful? This work is hard. We've chosen to frame ourselves on the backdrop of a dry river, which, as you know, Gabe, is you're more accustomed to, but for those of us further north is more traumatic. These are traumatic times. These are hard issues, challenging to bring solutions about. What keeps you each hopeful? Why don't you go first, Jen, and then you, Gabe, and then I'll close.
Sure. I mean, I think for me, it's I feel like there's a shift happening. I mean, I've been doing this for 8 years, and I've sometimes felt kind of like the lone wolf out there trying to make a big change. And I feel like there are lots of people out there that really do care, and I are willing to, have hard conversations. And I love it when I can learn. I mean, I thank you so much, Gabe, for being on this webinar with us. I mean, I've learned so much just by having this conversation, and I'm inspired by the fact that people are coming to the river still in places where the river has largely been sacrificed. And so my hope is that, we can work toward, returning water to southern New Mexico, and also protecting water in central New Mexico, so that, everyone deserves a living river, and that we can try to make that happen. And it may not be like it was 200 years ago, but it's something that can really, feed people's souls, because I think that's what people need. I mean, I think COVID has taught us that people need nature and they need connection, and that's what rivers do. If we could take a full circle back to the beginning of where we started and got our river legs. So thanks for being a part of this, Gabe, and I'll give you the last word.
That's beautiful. Thank you, Jen. Gabe.
Thank you, Jen. Thank you, John, also for having me on. A pleasure to be here with you and with your audience and your members. It keeps me going. This in Mexico, we call this the Rio Bravo, the brave river, right? Because at one time this river was so wild, and it was so unpredictable, especially because of those monsoons that would come and alter the course of the river dramatically. I mean, the river might shift a quarter mile in any given year based on how much monsoon waters we got. And so they had to change the boundary of the US-Mexico border like 4 times, because the river wouldn't stay put, right? And so it was once a very wild and unpredictable river. And so if we take a cue from the river, we should be brave too, right? And we should fight for that river the same way that it's provided for us in our communities for so long. We can be bravo for the river that has sustained our community and our life, and for those kids in that picture, in that river, and for those families standing at the bottom of that bridge every year, waiting for the river to come. It's hard not to have hope when you see a picture like that. So that keeps me going, and I love my community. I think the river is the heart and soul of who we are in Las Cruces in the Mesilla Valley, and so it's here to fight for. Thanks, John.
That's beautiful. Thank you, Gabe. I love the idea that for the Rio Bravo's sake, we all need to be brave, because for all of us who have passion for the things we care about, it's an act of courage to love things that are vulnerable. And there's nothing more vulnerable than the natural world, especially in these times. And we've got these compounding crises of climate and nature. And I appreciate the conversation with both of you, and to all of the activists and artists and boaters and birders who love rivers. Stay engaged, stay hopeful. We'll continue to cultivate our community here at Guardians on behalf of rivers. And thank you for showing up tonight and listening in and asking questions. Again, we're grateful and we'll continue to engage with you. And again, thank you, Jen, and thank you, Gabe.
Thank you, John. Thanks, Gabe.
All right, everyone. Thank you and have a nice night.